Church, we are continuing this awkward series that we named Take It Off, this relationship series. And Pastor Keisha did such an amazing job last week setting us up, telling us these are the things that we need to remove and take out of our lives to be the people that God says we are, so that we can come in a service like today and claim that identity, that we are chosen, we are not forsaken. This is who we are. But there's more to it than that today. We're going to talk about things that we need to put on, and I can't wait to take you there. But before we do that, would you help me welcome everybody that's watching online, those that online in Ironton right now, welcome. Man, we are so glad you guys are joining us today. And I want you to know, I really do believe that God's got a word for us. And I believe that every time we come into this room, church, because there's something special that happens when we come in humility and give ourselves over to God and just allow the Spirit to move within our hearts. And that's going to be my prayer for all of us today, because I believe God's got something for us. If you want to turn there while you're standing, we're going to be in Colossians chapter 3. We're going to be looking at verses 12 to 14, and we remain standing because we believe that in God's word there is truth, and we want to be reverent to what God has to say to us today. All right, let's go there together, church. It says this, beginning in verse 12, it says, "Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. And over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity." This morning, church, we're going to learn how to dress in layers, because this is Ohio. And it could very well start snowing here in about 5 minutes. You never know. So would you turn around to somebody next to you, the person you like the most, and tell them the title of today's message is, "Put It On." All right, you can have a seat. Ooh, I can already tell you guys, the 11 o'clock crowd is so fun. Man, it's a joy to be here with you guys. And I got to say, I need some energy this morning, because I woke up at 3:45 this morning, which is, don't celebrate that. It's awful. I woke up at 3:45 this morning because, normally I set all these alarms on my phone. Stop it. Normally I set all these alarms on my phone because I had this really horrible thing happen to me early in ministry. And it was before I was actually in ministry, but I was working for another church here in town. I'm not going to say the name of it. But it was like the worst experience of my life. I woke up on a Sunday morning, and I realized one thing that was awful, which was there was sunlight coming through the window. All right, if you do what I do for a living, there is never sunlight coming through the window on a Sunday morning. That only means one thing. That means you missed an alarm and you overslept. And I wake up and I see sunlight pouring through the window. I turn around, I look at my phone, I pull it up, and I see it was like 4 or 5 voicemails. I'm like, oh no. So then I get the courage to actually listen to them, and it was not pretty. They were not happy voicemails. These are not the voicemails you want to wake up to. And somehow I had completely slept through my alarm and just didn't hear it at all. And I still have nightmares to this day about that happening again. So I set myself like 4 or 5 alarms every single weekend on Sunday morning, because I will never let that happen. But this morning, I didn't need that alarm, because God woke me up at 3:45, which was just lovely. So right now, I'm running on fumes and espresso. So bear with me. But I need some energy this morning. And anytime we come in here, we always talk about great congregations make great pastors. So can I trust you guys to be interactive with me this morning? All right, we're going to have some conversations together, and they're going to get kind of serious, and they might get a little bit awkward, but it's okay, because you guys can be right there with me. And it's going to be amazing. So, big question right now that we're going to pull out of the book of Colossians, and it's this question: who are you? Yeah, it's rhetorical, but yeah, that's right. So it's so funny. Like if you ever walk up to somebody on the street and you ask them, "Hey, who are you?" What's the first thing they're going to tell you? Their name, right? And these aren't Be Hope people, because Be Hope people know the right answer, right? You know where we're going with this. But you ask them again, "Hey, I didn't ask you what your name was. I asked you who you are. Who are you?" What's the next place we go? Our job. That's it. It's our job, right? It's, well, this is what I do for a living, right? If I introduce myself to somebody on the street, I'll start with my name. "Hey, I'm Dusty. Well, who are you?" "Well, I'm a pastor at this church over here." Okay. And if that doesn't work, then I start going to my hobbies. "Well, who are you?" "Well, I like to do this. I like to play music, and I like to do this." And we start going down the list, right? Because in our culture, we only know how to describe ourselves a certain way. and it's by the things that we place our identity in, right? It's by my abilities. It's by my job. It might be by my status, right? We categorize ourselves in all these different areas, but we don't actually get to the root of the question. So it's interesting in Colossians, Paul gives us this like masterclass on relationships. And first of all, did you guys think that it was just a relationship series for your spouse? Anybody come into this thinking that? That's what I assume. Anytime a church presents a relationship series to me, I'm like, this is going to be amazing for anybody that's married and over the age of like 22. Great. And I want to say this morning, we're going to go a lot more places with it, because who do you have relationships with in your life? Everyone that you come into contact with, that's a relationship, or at least a potential relationship. And we want to make sure we get it started on the right foot. So back to this main question. Who are you? This question matters a whole lot, more than we think it does. Okay, why is that? Because there's this little fact of life that says this. It says, any of our actions are rooted in what we believe about ourselves. Right, let me phrase it another way. My actions stem from my identity. All right, let's unpack that a little bit. There was a movie I think it came out in 1967. It was an animated Disney movie called The Jungle Book. Do you guys remember Jungle Book? Yeah. Now, to be fair, I haven't seen this movie in ages, so I actually don't remember what happens at the end of Jungle Book. But the setup is this. The setup is there's this boy who was raised by wolves. He has no idea he's a human. He was raised by wolves. He's always around wolves. He only knows how to go out and hunt with the pack. And it's really awkward because he walks on all four legs, even though he obviously has 2 arms and 2 legs. But no one has ever told him that he's a human. So what does he do? All of his actions are as if he was pretending to be a wolf. He doesn't know any better. No one had ever told him any differently. His identity shaped his actions. Right, you see where I'm going with this? And here's the thing. There was a quote by Orson Scott Wells, who wrote a book series called Ender's Game. And he said this. He said, perhaps it's impossible to wear an identity without becoming what you pretend to be. Okay, why does that matter to us this morning? And I know it's early in the message, and we don't need to get too serious right off the bat. We got to kind of work our way into it, right? It's kind of like what we do with worship sometimes. Like, we'll start real high energy, and eventually we're going to get to these places that are kind of a little bit more serious because we're primed and we're ready for it. But right off the bat, there's this question about identity that we need to understand before we can even interpret what Paul is writing there in Colossians. We need to talk about the core of who we are, because if you get your identity wrong, you're going to get a lot of things wrong in your relationships, because you're going to start acting as if you're somebody that you're really not, and you might not even realize that's not who you are. So I remember, like, early in my ministry career, I was talking to a friend, and we had a really good relationship, so he would joke with me a lot, and he would always tell me, he's like, "Are you sure you want to be a pastor?" And I'm like, "No." And this is what he told me. He said, on paper, he said, there's nothing about you and your personality that makes sense in a pastor role. He's like, so we're start going down the list. And he was doing this out of love, right? He's going down the list. He's like, likes people. I'm like, no. Except you guys. You guys are awesome. Like, very empathetic. No. Very emotional and, very heart-driven. Like, no. Right, I'm very logical. That's kind of how my mind works. My heart doesn't work that way. But there's this piece that I started to think about. I'm like, okay, why would God set me up for failure, right? Why would God call me into this thing that I was clearly not wired for or made for? Because I believed that there were elements of my personality that didn't lend themselves well to doing what I felt like God was calling me to do. So I started to question, okay, I don't think this is the thing for me. So I kind of convinced myself. I said, man, what do I probably want to be? I want to be a musician in a church. That's fine. I don't need a pastor role to do that. Churches just need people who can play instruments well, and that's going to be my thing. That's going to be my lane, and I'm going to stay right in it, and I don't have to deal with the people issues, and that's going to be great. And that's legitimately what I thought was going to happen. I was completely geared for that. And over time, little by little, that wasn't the case, right? Over time, I don't know if I changed or I think my heart changed, but slowly, little by little, God actually showed me, hey, this is who I wired you to be. And there's actually a truth about yourself that you may not understand yet, right? That maybe you haven't accepted because someone told you this is who you are. But it wasn't who God created me to be. So all my actions at that point came out of the idea that I thought this was what my identity was rooted in. All right, and that's what I want to dispel for you a little bit this morning, because there are so many people, and I assume almost everybody in this room has been given a label by somebody else, right? Someone has said something about you. Doesn't matter what the environment is. If you're in a relationship with anybody, there are people that will say things about you that may or may not be true, but you've probably started to believe it, right? When somebody says something about you enough times, eventually that starts to become who you think you are because you've just heard it over and over and over again, right? If somebody tells you you're not empathetic, eventually it's like, well, I'm definitely not empathetic, and I don't even care to be empathetic because I've been told that over and over. And eventually your actions start to go in line with that, and I become less empathetic. See how this works? It's a really dangerous thing if we don't get our identity right, because all of our actions are going to stem from that. So this is where we're going to start diving into the scripture today. We are going to see what God says we are. Okay? It's important. We need an objective source of truth in our lives to tell us who we are. Because the person sitting next to you might have an idea of who you are, but it still might not be right. Right? Don't you want something objective, an objective source to say, this is actually who I am, who doesn't care what I've done or where I've been. Who actually am I? What's the standard that I need to live my life? You guys remember the show American Idol from way back when, right? What was the best part about that show? Do you remember? It wasn't the actual competition, to be fair. The best part about the show was the auditions, right? That was the only part I ever cared to watch because it was such a disaster. And you would see all these people, they would get to this stage where they're on TV, and they would start singing. And it's just like, oh, no. And they would always make these comments like they couldn't believe that the judge was telling them that they weren't good. You know, they said, oh, honey, you can't sing. And they said, well, my friend says I'm the best singer in the world, and I've been invited to sing at everybody's birthday party. My choir teacher said I'm amazing. All these people said I'm amazing. And then all I think to myself in that moment is, oh my goodness, like you have been failed in life. Because there is nobody that was kind enough to actually step into your life and tell you the truth about, something objective, right? You had all these relationships and nobody wanted to hurt your feelings, and you lost this sense of objectivity. So the cool thing about how we relate to Scripture is an objective truth for us to follow. I don't want to know what anybody else in this room says about me. I want you to know what God says about me. So this is where we're going, Colossians 3:12, and we're going to stop right here at the first part of this passage. And it's easy to miss. It says this, it says, therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. And we're stopping right there. That's it. Okay, the first time I read this scripture, I skipped right over that part because my mind wants to go right to the meat of the scripture. I said, okay, here, holy and dearly loved, that's great. Okay, let's see what it really says. And I missed the significance of that little statement. Because what is this? This is God telling us exactly who we are. This is God framing up our identity for us. Look at those words again, holy and dearly loved, and we are God's chosen people. As God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved. That's your identity right there. And I don't want you to miss it. And it looks so simple on paper. But think about your relationships. Think about how your relationships would change if you just believed that one truth about yourself right there. That you are chosen, that God chooses you, right? That you are holy, this will affect our actions, and that we are dearly loved. When people feel loved, you will begin to love others. Amen. Right? You've heard that, phrase, hurt people. Like that's a real thing. If you don't feel like you're loved, you're not going to know how to love others. But if we can center ourselves in the identity that God gave us, we are going to interact with people in a much different way. And this affects every relationship we have in our lives. So I want the truth of who God says I am. I am holy and chosen and dearly loved. Now, here's the thing. Where else do we put our identity if we don't understand those truths? The first place we put it is in our abilities, right? Because how many of us feel like we're only valued because of what we bring to the table? Right? Oh, everybody wants you as a friend because this is what you offer to this group. Everybody wants, your spouse might say, oh, this is what you're really good at, and this is your value in this relationship. And that's a really dangerous place to be. Right, I got to tell you, it was shortly after I got into ministry, and like some of you have heard this because this has kind of been a part of my story over the years, but it was like a couple of years into ministry, my first full-time worship thing, and I started to go deaf. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh my goodness, like I just poured my whole life into getting ready for this, and now God's going to take away the only thing that I'm good at, right? My whole value system was wrapped up in this is what I do. And if this goes away, I don't have an identity with God anymore, right? What are we going to do if that's the case? If our whole value system is relying on our abilities, what's going to happen when that ability disappears? Because abilities shift, right? Like even right now, like I'm less good at music now because I can't quite hear the same way I used to. And it's taken me a long time to reconcile that to God and to say, well, then what is my use? What is my purpose? And if I don't go back to those core three truths, that I'm holy, that I'm chosen, that I'm dearly loved, I'm not going to have a leg to stand on. We do this on our hope teams all the time, right? When we're trying to find people to fit in certain teams, we put so much of our identity into this thing that we have to offer. And what happens if we don't get to use that as often as we want to use it? It's a huge disappointment, right? It's like, this is who God designed me to be, and I'm not able to use this. And what I want to tell you right now, I want to dispel that lie. I want to dispel that. That's not who God created you to be. God will give you abilities, and those might come for a season, and those might disappear later, or you might be able to keep those forever. But that's not where your value is, right? Your value is not in what you have to offer. That's not how this thing works. Our value is in our identity, right? We're going to say those three things one more time. We are what? We are chosen, we are holy, and we are dearly loved. Say it one more time to your neighbor, those three words. So let me go back to this question. How would your relationships change if you actually believed those things? How would you treat your friend? How would you treat your spouse? How would you treat your neighbor if you really believed that you were loved and that you were chosen and you were holy? Right? You might have a little more patience with them. There's all kinds of things that will help us if we get that identity correct. All right? How I approach God. If I believe that I am loved by God, then I'm not going to view God as this, this character that's way out in existence that's got his finger on the smite button, right? That if I do the wrong thing, it's like, boom, lights over, that's the end of the story, right? If I view God as like a disciplinarian, that's how I'm going to have that relationship established, and that's going to change the way that I interact with God. The same thing happens in our relationships. When God says he desires a relationship with you, that's what that means. God's not looking just to be your judge. God is looking for an actual relationship with you, and you can't have a relationship until you understand those core truths about yourself. Can we celebrate right now that we know where our identity is founded? Come on, come on. And I told you we're going to dress in layers today, right? 3 layers. So I invited my friend. My friend Manny is here. And I've got to give you a little bit of a caveat with Manny. Manny is a little bit awkward, especially in social situations. And I need you guys to just make him feel really, really welcome. So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to give a countdown, 3, 2, 1, and we're going to say, come on out, Manny. Here we go. 3, 2, 1. Come on out, man. Manny, ladies and gentlemen. Come on. And also Abby. Abby, ladies and gentlemen, thank you. That's the hardest job here all morning because I swear we were trying to put this thing together, and every time you try to move it, it would like tip over because it's really top heavy and the arms kept falling off. So we got it. 3rd time's a charm. It's working this time. So when we think about let's talk about our lives and clothing, right? We said we're going to dress in 3 layers. The first layer that we put on is this identity. That's why we spent so much time on this. So this is our base layer. And when I bought this shirt, I didn't realize Manny was as skinny as he actually is. So the word kind of gets squished a little bit there because Manny is not an XL. Manny's like a small, right? There we go, looking good. So let's read how we have to clothe ourselves. Let's continue. This is Colossians 3, 12, and 13. It says this. It says, clothe yourselves with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. All right, what happened when you woke up this morning? How'd you get here? What's the first thing you did? Hopefully you got dressed, right? Maybe not the first thing you did, but it's somewhere in that line. Before you got to church, you got yourself dressed, right? And how amazing would it be? Like, you imagine it, we just wake up and you stretch, and a shirt just falls, and your whole outfit is already picked out. You don't have to do anything. It's like, boom, I woke up, therefore, this is how I'm presenting myself. It all happened without any of my acknowledgement. That would be amazing. I would love that. There's a lot of times I get dressed on a Sunday morning, and it's like pitch black because I don't want to wake the kids up or wake my wife up, so I'm like creeping through the closet, and then I get to church and realize what I put on has a big stain that I didn't see even though I washed it. That would be super nice. But that's not how it works. See, we had to choose to get dressed. We had to go to the closet and actually decide what we were going to put on, right? We put on a shirt, we put on pants. Hopefully we put on other things before we got here. You may have picked something up and done the smell test on it. You know the smell test? Make sure like, oh, this might not be washed, but I think it's got like a couple more wears in it. Like jeans, you can get away with that a couple times, right? I'm not here to judge you. The person next to you might be. See, we have to choose to clothe ourselves. And it's like so appropriate, this metaphor that Paul uses here. He keeps saying, clothe yourself. What does that mean to clothe ourselves? There's a choice we have in the matter, right? We actually have to put something on. We have to be aware of what we are putting on, and we have to choose to put something on. So we're going to use Manny here, and we're going to dress Manny. So Manny's going to show us, and we're going to talk about how we put on these virtues that Paul talks about. So the first thing we're going to put on Manny is, what's it say? It says, clothe yourself with compassion. All right, we got compassion right here. So if you're a note taker, this is a good time to take notes because I want to describe these in a little bit more detail. What is it to be compassionate? What does compassion actually mean? In our spiritual lives, we think about it this way. This is how we care for others. All right, let's stick that on there. This is how we care for others. When someone comes to you with a problem, what's your immediate response to that? Is it to be compassionate or is it to cut them off? Because now it's an inconvenience to you. We have to choose to put on compassion. Paul gives us another item in the list. He says, kindness. All right, what is kindness? Kindness is how we act towards others. It's a good look, right? Next thing we put on, humility. What is humility? Humility, this is a tricky one. This one some of you guys need to hear. Humility is how we act towards ourselves, right? We need to learn to be humble because if we are humble, then we can receive what God actually has for us. We don't have to think of ourselves as higher than anybody else because if you think you're not here to serve, man, that's how the kingdom works. We are all here to serve. That's the calling of God. We don't think of ourselves as a lofty person. We're not. Just as Jesus came not to be served, but what did he do? He came to serve. And we think we're better than Jesus? How? That's our role too. Next thing in the list, gentleness. This is how we approach others. All right, the outfit's starting to come together. Next item in the list that Paul tells us to clothe ourselves with. Clothe ourselves with patience. What is patience? This is how we react to others. This one a lot of us need to work on too. This one's hard for me because I just want to solve the problem when somebody comes up to me with a problem. It's like, well, all you have to do is do this. Why haven't you fixed the problem yet? Right? Patience is a hard one for me. I have to remember to put that on every day. And lastly, this is a big one. Forgiveness. Right? He says, forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you. So what is forgiveness? Forgiveness is how we respond to others. There we go. Everybody on this side of the room can see this side. If you're on that side of the room, you might be able to see that side. Right? This is how we clothe ourselves. And this is where we have to go back to that metaphor, right? When you go to the closet, you have to choose to put these things on. These things are not going to magically happen in your life. If you want your relationships to actually get better, there's a choice that you have to make in it. You have to choose to make them better. You have to choose to actually wear these things. So how do we do that, spiritually speaking? And this is going to sound, I don't want this to sound legalistic, right? I'm a little fearful for that because I came from a really legalistic background, and I always want to, go in a reactionary way, really far away from that. But there's a piece of Christian faith that I think, especially now, we kind of discount a little bit because we don't want to be legalistic. But there's a piece of like, hey, how often do you get dressed? Every day. If you're not getting dressed that day, you're probably not going anywhere, all right? This is so appropriate for our spiritual lives because how often do we have to go to God and actually put these things on? Every day. And we don't want to be legalistic and be like, oh, you need to read your Bible, pray every day. There used to be a little song about that, right? Because we want to say, oh, God's just with us and we don't need to be, that's kind of this old school way of thinking about God. And that's a little bit of a trap for us, right? Because there is an element, if we have a relationship with somebody, you've got to cultivate that every single day. So every day, you have to wake up and actually choose to dress yourself with these virtues. You have to choose to put on compassion. You have to put on kindness, humility, patience, gentleness, forgiveness, day after day after day. Because here's the kicker, right? All of us can put these things on for a short amount of time, right? A lot of us are really good at faking these things or doing it in really small increments. So I can be compassionate for a day. That's not that hard, right? You can be kind for a moment. That works well for a few hours. How about the next day? Are you going to be kind again? And again, and again. Are you going to be patient again and again and again? So think about it like this. Who are my gym people in here? Gym people? Yes, all right. So when you go to the gym, right, you're working out, whatever your machine of choice is. Mine was like the elliptical. The 4 times a year I go to the gym. It's the elliptical. It's a good one. And, you start sweating through stuff, and you throw those sweaty clothes in a gym bag, and you go home. Okay. So next day you wake up, you buy a new shirt. It's like, hey, I need an undershirt on this. Here's the one I've got. It's from the gym bag. You do give it the smell test again. It's not great, but I think I'll be able to cover it up with this new shirt. You put that new shirt on. You come to church. We're in worship. You're waving your arms out like this. What's going to happen eventually? You might be able to cover that smell up for a little bit, but eventually that thing's going to seep through, right? You can't hide it for long. If we don't have our identity right, if we don't have this shirt right, and this is a smelly shirt, what are these things going to stick to? Nothing. What's our fix? Let me tell you what we actually try to do. This is what we all try to do. You guys know what this is? Oh, yeah, this is what every middle school in the country smells like right here. Whew. Right? We say, hey, I can be compassionate for a little bit. Oh, are you going to be like that every day? Oh, I don't know, but we'll just do this, right? We'll give it a little, good. Third time's a charm. Still smells terrible. Ooh. A few Warax this morning. I'm sorry. I don't mean to offend you. It's a potent. Right? These are just temporary measures we put on. We can just spray in layers and layers of stuff on top of it. Eventually, it doesn't matter, man. If that shirt's not clean, it's not going to matter. There's nothing for it to stick to. I learned this once. I'm going to go back to college one more time for you. So my early background was I used to be in classical piano. That was my thing. I know I really look like a classical musician guy, but this was my background. So we used to do this stuff with the symphony and the Dayton Philharmonic and all this fun stuff. And I learned something when I was competing in all these little piano competitions. I learned that I can fake confidence really well, and I can win some of these things just by pretending I'm something that I'm not. Right? So I had friends that would be in the practice rooms for hours and hours on end, and they were so disciplined and so dedicated. And I'm looking out from the side, I'm like, that's silly. So I'm gonna go learn this thing real quick in a few hours, and then here's my strategy. If I just go out there and I go out in front of these judges, and I command the attention of the room, and I sit down at the piano, and I just look like I'm doing everything with confidence, that actually works pretty well. There were some competitions I won that I had no business winning, that I knew my friend was much better at than I was. And I would teach him, I said, hey, you want to go out there and win these things, you have to sell it a little bit. You got to fake it a little bit. Confidence goes a long way. And we think the same things in life. I can fake these things for a little bit, but eventually it's going to run out. Eventually you're going to be found out because you didn't have the right identity on in the first place, and there's nothing for it to stick to. See, in your relationships, the people closest to you are the ones that know, right? We can fake anything on social media. I can make every vacation look like it was a blast, and nobody knows the absolute meltdown tantrum that happened 5 minutes before that picture was taken. That's the joy of cultivating a life that's not a real life, right? I can present myself as anything I want to be. It's kind of amazing, but it's also incredibly dangerous. But the person that you know the most, who's the person sitting around you right now that knows you the most? If you were to turn around and actually ask them, hey, am I a compassionate person? Am I a kind person? They'll probably give you the actual true answer. We're not good at evaluating ourselves, but the people close to us will be able to tell us those things. And I want to get stuck in one more of these here that's really important, this forgiveness piece right here. There's people in this room that have been holding on to grudges for far too long. And this is a huge piece for us because if we can't forgive someone else, what does that do? That poisons us, right? It doesn't hurt them any. They may have forgotten about this thing a long time ago, but when we hold on to grudges, eventually over time we start to become bitter, right? We don't know how to operate in kindness anymore because this poison that we have taken is starting to infiltrate our lives. And a great theologian and pastor named N.T. Wright, he actually had this amazing quote about forgiveness. If we can just put this on the screen, I want to read this out to you. It says this. It says, "First, it is utterly inappropriate for one who knows the joy and release of being forgiven to refuse to share that blessing with another. Second, it is highly presumptuous to refuse to forgive one whom Christ himself has already forgiven." Wow. Here's the thing. If you're not forgiving someone, that's you being presumptuous. That's you taking something for granted, because if we want to get our identity right, we need to understand that we're all on the same page in this one thing. We all are not worthy of forgiveness. There's not a person in this room who is worthy of forgiveness. But here's the thing. If you ask Christ into your heart and Christ forgave you, then how dare we hold that against someone else when they come to us and ask for forgiveness, right? This is a poison that will absolutely eat you alive. And there's some of you here this morning that need to absolutely get that out of your life, who've been holding on to something for far too long for whatever valid reason in the world. And it's time to get rid of it. Turn to the person next to you and tell them, get rid of it. That's good. That was almost convincing. Man. So we're starting to get a new outfit, right? These are the clothes that God designed us for. And then there's one more piece before we continue that we need to come to grips with. New clothes are kind of uncomfortable, especially if we don't feel like they've been designed for us, right? What happens when you get a new pair of shoes? It takes a couple days to wear them in, right? Let me ask this question. This will make it even more fun. If you're going clothes shopping, who are my Walmart people in here? Walmart people? Yeah. See a fist fight breaking out there. That's what I expect when I go into Walmart. All right, who are my like Nordstrom, Von Maur, high-end people? Any high-end people? Nobody that cares to admit it? All right. Well, here's the thing. Here's the truth within this, okay? If God gives you all these new clothes, and these are the finest clothes, right? And God's telling you this is how you're going to clothe yourself, it may be really uncomfortable at first to actually wear those because you don't think you're worthy of those things, right? If someone walks up to me right now, and anybody, you're more than welcome to do it if anyone wants to, hands me a $6,000 custom-made suit or something like that. Now, to be fair, I'm not going to wear it here, but I'll probably wear it to something else. Hands me a custom-made suit, I'm going to think, oh, that is not for me. That is not who I am. I'm not worthy of wearing anything like that. I'm on a pastor's salary. That's not my thing. But there's a piece to it that God designed you for something more, right? God is telling you, hey, this is who I designed you to be. I designed you to wear the finest clothes, right? I designed you to be a Nordstrom person, and you're living like a Walmart person, right? And I won't be offensive, and I love Walmart. My wife buys clothes from Aldi, so it's fine. I didn't even know you could buy clothes at Aldi. I swear to you, she came home from the grocery store one day, and we had groceries, and it's like, are those pants? Are those shoes? Where'd you go? The grocery store, Aldi. Okay, news to me. So I'm not here to judge anything. I'm just saying, there's a difference in mentality. If you walk into a place like Von Maur and you get that, real nice fancy piano music playing in the background, you have a different expectation for yourself, right? I like to go into those places just to see if they're going to even talk to me. That's kind of a fun game I like to play because those places don't intimidate me. It's fine. I just think it's a joke. But God designed you for something more, and you need to get comfortable wearing the clothes that God designed you for, whether you think you deserve them or not. Can we celebrate that right now, church? You do deserve those clothes, and God expects you to wear them. All right, last piece I want to hit on. There's one more instruction in here that begins in verse 14, and it says this. It says, and over all these virtues, put on love, which binds them all together in perfect unity. All right, so Manny's going to help us out one more time, but I have to mute my microphone because this takes two hands. There we go. Got it. All right, see, love is the binder. This is the thing that holds it all together. So what does that mean for us? And this is where we're really going to put some teeth on this thing, okay? Because I need you to understand this. If you have a Bible, turn to Matthew 22 with me for just a second. If not, I'll just read it to you. All right. So in Matthew 22, Jesus has this teacher come up to him. One of the Pharisees gets up, and an expert in the law, and he comes to him with this question. He asks Jesus in verse 36. He says, "Teacher, which is the greatest commandment in the law?" And listen to the reply of Jesus. He says in verse 37, he says, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the first and greatest commandment." But then he continues. He says, "And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself." Oh, so that begs the question that we have a hard time answering. Who is our neighbor? Right? We think through the scope of relationships in our life. And this is something you may have never heard before, but I need you to understand it. Everybody that you come into contact with is your neighbor. You have a relationship with everybody that crosses your path. There's a guy that came up to me after the Saturday service, and he came up and said, "Hey, I've got this really helpful definition for what it means to love your neighbor." And he said, "Who's your neighbor?" And he said, "Everything my shadow touches. Every person my shadow falls on is my neighbor." Ooh, that's a lofty goal. Okay, so if I know that love is rooted in my identity, and if that identity is right, I have to put on all these virtues, and I have to wear those every day, and those are bound together in love, then what's the calling? The calling is, this is how we treat any relationship in our lives if we're going to live to be the person that God designed us to be. And we can't settle for less than that. But we really want to, because that's a really hard thing, right? Let me give you an example. So there's a shirt that I saw, and I've seen it on bumper stickers. I've seen it all over the place recently, to be honest with you. And I don't want to disparage this, so this is my caveat. If you've got one of these on your car, this is not a bad thing by itself. But I want to put it in context for you. So there's this little bumper sticker that just says, "Be kind." And I've seen it on a sign, and I've seen it on T-shirts, right? So let's talk about that for a second. Be kind. What does that mean for us? That's a really easy thing to do, and we can fake that. What do we know about love? Love incorporates kindness, but we stripped it of all of its power, and we said the highest goal that we can achieve in our society is just to be nice to one another. That's not who God designed us to be, guys. That's the low-hanging fruit, is be kind. Be kind. Kindness is just one of those virtues, right? This is one out of the 6 virtues that's divorced from identity and that's not wrapped in love. The calling that Jesus gives us is a much better one. Our society says, hey, be kind. That's high enough. That's a good enough goal to attain. Jesus says, no, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the goal. How much harder is that? It's easy to be kind. It's really hard to love someone. It takes a lot more work. It takes a lot more of ourselves. When's the last time you guys have been to a wedding? Yeah, I guarantee you've heard this at every wedding you've been at. 1 Corinthians 13. It says this. You've heard this, right? You probably have it on a sign in your house too. And you probably got it at Hobby Lobby. It says this. It says, love is patient. Love is kind. Love does not envy or boast. It's not arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It's not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice at wrongdoing, but it rejoices with the truth. So yeah, love is kind, but there's a lot more to it than that. Love requires something of us. Love requires some sacrifice on our end. And there's some of you in here that have war zone relationships where you can't get along with anybody because you've never really learned how to put on love as that binder that holds everything together. You've tried to just pick some of these virtues, and you might manage those temporarily and then spray the axe on yourself and say, this is who God called me to be. But it's not. It's more than that, church. It is so much more than that. Love is going to require something of you. If you're going to love well and you want your relationships to get better, you need to start living the way Jesus commands you to live. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and soul. And this way, love your neighbor as yourself. And you're going to be better off for it. There's something that my wife Nicole and I learned a couple Christmases ago. We tried starting this new tradition. And she came to me one time and said, hey, I have this idea. And usually my wife has ideas. She's much more empathetic than I am, right? She is a much better picture of love most of the time than I am. She came to me and said, hey, what if we, on Christmas Day, just invited a whole bunch of people over, and we're going to order some Chinese food, and we're just going to have this big party. And my first thought that came through my head was, Christmas Day. That's like the one day, like I work at a church, that's like the one day that typically doesn't get touched, and I need that rest, right? And she said, no, let's just try it. Let's try it, because there's people that, want to be included in things. There's people that are here with military and don't have families around, and they just need somewhere to connect. And so begrudgingly, it's like, okay, we'll try it one time. I'll make sure I get a longer nap the day before, and we'll see how it goes. And I was not really excited about it. I mean, that's just honest. I wasn't very excited about it. And we ended up getting together, and we just had a fantastic time, right? And I learned a little more about what it is to truly love because it came at a sacrifice. Oh, there it is. Yes, that was the picture from the first one that we did right there. Yeah, see, some of you guys are in that picture and you're feeling real awkward right now because you didn't know you're going to be used in the sermon illustration. That's what happens if you're friends with me. All right. And it was, let me tell you, it was so much fun. So we're like, we're going to make it a pajama party. We're just going to be goofy with it. And we're just going to have fun together because that's a way that we can show love. It came at a sacrifice. It wasn't what I wanted to do, but at the same time, God showed me so much more through being able to do that. He said, this is how you love one another. You do it when it's inconvenient for you. You provide opportunities wherever I give you opportunities, and you use the things I've given you to serve others. That's what love is, guys. It's in service to others. There's not a person who serves on a hope team in this church that is doing this for themselves. I hope not. We are called to serve just as Jesus was called to serve. If we're really going to love people the way that we are called to love, we have to be ready to give some of those things up. Give up the things that we want to do and instead do the things that Jesus is commanding us to do. We are called to be a loving people. So how do we know if we're wearing it? This is the last place we're going, church. How do we know if we're wearing love? We can ask ourselves 3 questions. All right, once again, if you're a note taker, these are good. Number 1, am I doing it for my own personal gain? Because love is never self-serving. Love comes at a cost. Question 2, am I manipulating someone or something in the process? Right? Because love is never about what we get out of it. It's about what we can offer to it. And number 3, is it honest? Because love says some really hard things sometimes. You know who your good friends are. You know where your best relationships are because these are the people that can tell you things that you don't want to hear. And you know they're looking out for your best interest, right? These are the people who can actually say something hard to you that might seem insulting, but you know they're saying it because they love you. That's what love actually looks like. It's not just being kind. Some of those things might not feel kind in the moment. But this is how we love one another. A simple definition is just this. Love is wanting what's best for you more than what's easiest for me. Wanting what's best for you more than what's easiest for me. See, this morning, some of you guys need to understand what it is to actually put on this entire outfit, to layer up the right way, right? And it might be any one of those steps that you're missing out in your life. Maybe you're not spending daily time with God. You're not learning how to cultivate the right identity. You're not learning how to wear the virtues that God tells you to wear. And this morning, you have a choice to start moving in a different direction, to actually let go of the lie of what people have projected onto you and instead get with the truth of who God says you are. God's going to change your life if you do that, church. I know he will. He's done that to me. And it's amazing. You will start living a life that you did not know you were even capable of because it's no longer rooted in your own strength and power. Most of the time it goes against whatever your strengths are because God desires to grow us and it's uncomfortable at first. And if we want to have better relationships in our lives, we have to get rooted in who God is. Put on the virtues he tells us to put on. And we have to wrap all those things in love. Would you stand with me, church? Lord, this morning, you've given us some lofty things to think about. Lord, you've shown us how hard it can be sometimes to love all those around us. God, you've shown us that our relationships are with anyone and everyone we come across. Father, would you show us how to be a loving people because the world is watching. God, show us how to be an example, not just in our cities, God, in our households, in our friend groups, God, anywhere we come into contact, Lord. Would you give us the courage to step into that identity that you have actually called us in? And may we be brave enough to actually do it. Lord, would you build our life on the foundation of the very love that you showed us? And God, that we can go in and tell a new story, God, that we can go back and turn around and say, this was the moment that our God did something in my life. This was the moment that he turned my relationships in a different direction because I started to believe things about myself that I know were true because God said so. This is the high calling, church, to build our lives upon the foundation of God's love. If you're willing to do that with me right now, we're just going to offer up this chorus to our God, and we're going to make this a prayer. I will build my life upon your love. It is a firm foundation. Sing this until we believe it, church. Lift up our voice.